on the whole, would you say that what you see now is indicative of a conservative policy agenda for governing? Not necessarily, no. I think we've sort of reached the kitchen sink phase of the campaign,
wherein that's a good way of putting it.
Donald Trump is just going to sort of say whatever he needs to say to whomever he needs to say it on any given day, if he believes that it can help him scrape together the coalition that he needs.
Welcome to Beg to Differ, the Bulwark's weekly roundtable discussion featuring civil conversation across the political spectrum. We range from center-left to center-right. I'm Mona Charan, syndicated columnist and policy editor at the Bulwark, and I'm joined this week by one of my regulars, Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution and the Wall Street Journal. Two of our regulars are out, Linda and Damon, and so I'm delighted to be joined by two Bulwark colleagues, Sonny Bunch, our culture editor, and Sam Stein, our managing editor. Welcome to both of you. Our wonderful special guest this week is Tim Alberta of The Atlantic, author of several books that are must-read. And so, with that, let us dig in to this week's news. I'd like to begin with a conversation about polling and about the way this race seems to be shaking out as of now, late September, few weeks left to go in the race. And it is looking, Tim, like one of the biggest divides in the electorate, if not the largest divide, is men versus women. We have had a gender gap in American politics going back decades. It was around 6 or 7% difference in 2004, 2008. It was 15 points different in 2016, and this year bids to be even bigger than that. And so one of the things that we have seen is Trump attempting to appeal to both men and women in different ways. So he's attempting to appeal. Let's start with his appeals to women. He's saying, I will be your protector. You will be completely happy and safe and comfortable if I am elected, and you won't even have to think about abortion, he said. So your thoughts on the gender gap and on Trump's initial forays into appealing to more women voters?
Yeah, Mona, I'd say a couple of things. First, to the final point you made there, it's very much in keeping with the Trump campaign's theory of the case in looking primarily at affluent, college-educated suburban women outside of Detroit and Milwaukee and Philadelphia and Phoenix, Atlanta, Vegas, Raleigh-Durham, Charlotte, where they're zeroing in on really about a dozen counties where they feel like if they can hold their own among that sort of two-car garage, college-educated soccer mom demographic, that they're going to win. And their theory of the case really is that these soccer moms are actually security moms. They're actually safety moms. And that their biggest concern, whether they will voice it to a pollster or in a focus group or even to the moms in their book club, is that they're scared about their communities. They're scared about crime. They're scared about illegal immigration, even if it's happening 3,000 miles away. That has been sort of a constant belief inside the Trump campaign that has animated a lot of what they've done. I think more broadly, to your point about this gender gap, we've become accustomed to seeing a pretty sharp divergence, seeing Democrats win handily among women, and then seeing Republicans sort of overperform among men, but not in any dramatic way necessarily. I think we're now seeing this double gender gap where it's widening on both sides, with both men and with women. And I think maybe the single most interesting thing driving that is Trump's gains among working class men of color in Latino communities and in Black communities. We've seen that pretty consistently. This is not a new thing necessarily. We saw some early signs of this even in the 2022 midterms, but I would say that even in the past 18 months of polling, we've seen this with some regularity. We've seen that working class Latino men, especially, but also black men under 40, have registered higher approval ratings, favorability ratings of Trump, and voiced a willingness to vote for Trump in ways that we have not seen before, at a scale we have not seen before. And if that shows up on election day, that's a big if, because there's a lot of doubt even inside of the Trump camp as to whether those numbers ultimately translate to votes on election day. But if they do, then the math for Harris becomes pretty difficult.
Sonny, so while he is making statements about, he's going to be women's protector, he is dragged down a little bit, of course, by having J.D. Vance as his running mate, who hardly ever opens his mouth without offending women. The only reason to have postmenopausal women around is so that they can take care of the grandchildren. That's their only function in this life, etc. Which, as our colleague JVL points out, grandmothers taking care of their grandchildren is a very benign aspect of American life, and leave it to J.D. Vance to make it sound somehow insulting and demeaning.
Yeah. And he says it in the weirdest way, right? Like he frequently calls women females, which is like, yes. Again, it's a weird, very online tick. The discussion of postmenopausal, whatever. He's very online. Look, I continue every time I'm on one of these shows or at a live event or whatever. I say the same thing, and I feel like I'm repeating myself. But it has to be said, the issue that the reason the gender gap persists and will probably expand a little bit is pretty simple. It's abortion. The GOP, abortion is a weird issue in America, because I do think that a lot of the time the nuance gets lost in terms of where the public really is. There's a place in the middle where people don't want late-term abortion to be illegal. They want early abortion to be illegal, and then it gets kind of fought in the middle. And you get both sides arguing to the extremes, like there should be none. It should be up to the moment of birth. There should be no laws restricting it whatsoever. And I think that redounds to Harris's benefit, in the sense that if you force people to choose between no abortions and way fewer restrictions on abortion, they're probably going to go with way fewer restrictions, just out of self-interest as much as anything else. So I think I think the polling shows that women are very scared is maybe the wrong word, but very up in arms about this. It's a big issue for them, big concern, understandably. You have state parties, state Republican parties throughout the country pushing very extreme abortion bans. That's not good. And as much as Trump tries to back away from that, I do think that the party itself has a branding issue here. There's no getting away from the GOP being the party of being anti-abortion. That is what it is. I see people make this joke sometimes, but the GOP really is the dog that caught the car with Roe, right? This is whatever we want to say about Roe v. Wade, and I have fairly complicated feelings about that law and it being overturned, but or that ruling being overturned. But it does create a situation where abortion becomes a real legislative issue at the state and federal level. And that is going to hurt the GOP as long as they keep pushing for the most extreme bans state by state. Yep.
Bill, when Dobbs first came down, I remember talking about it on this program, about how the race was on for the two parties to define themselves as the more centrist and reasonable on the issue, and that whichever party seized that ground was going to have the issue. And I think that argument is over. I think the Democrats managed, even though they haven't changed their views, they still don't believe in any restrictions on abortion at all. Many Democrats don't. But the Republicans passed such draconian laws and framed it in such offensive terms that the issue is now, even though people used to express mixed feelings about abortion, if you look at the polling, those feelings aren't mixed anymore. I mean, there is a very solid majority, which there didn't used to be, for no restrictions, or at least minimal restrictions in law. Agree or disagree?
Agree in part, disagree in part.
Okay.
There has been a long-standing popular majority, in favor of the proposition that abortion should be legal in all or most circumstances. Mm-hmm. But the share saying most circumstances has dwarfed the share saying all circumstances. So, for a very long time, all or most beat some or none by anywhere between 55 to 60%. I'm not sure that sentiment has changed fundamentally. But as you properly said, when confronted with the alternative of draconian restrictions, which only about 10% of the population favors, of course there's going to be a hardening of the sentiment on the other side, and distinctions that used to make a big difference in the minds of the public are now making a smaller difference in the moment, and I should say in the heat of the moment. I am not sure that if the issue is posed differently in coming years on a state-by-state basis, that the no restriction forces are always going to win out. If the alternative is allowing a Republican legislature to run wild, then people are going to vote for no restrictions public referendum. But that's now. And in 5 years, I think the issue may be framed differently. So I don't see this as a permanent shift.
No. Nothing in politics is forever.
Right, or even necessarily very long-standing. At some point, maybe not now, I do have a question for Tim that's in his wheelhouse. But I don't want to interrupt the abortion flow.
No, that's fine. Let me come to Sam, and then we'll get back to that. Sam, there's another aspect of this whole men-women thing going on, which is Trump has been doing a tour of these podcasts by, the MAGA guys. I don't know what you call them, but they're like in the manosphere or something, and
we'll take it.
So he does these podcasts with let me find some of their names. There's the Ultimate Fighting Championship with a golfer, with an internet streamer called Aiden Ross, and a podcaster called Theo Von, and the wrestler. So, and of course at the Republican convention, you had Hulk Hogan and all of that sort of thing. So not subtle.
No.
But do you think this is effective with young men? Because Trump is not polling. He does poll better with men than women, but among the young guys that this seems to be geared to, he's not doing that well. Even just in general with younger voters.
Well, thank you for coming to me with the young male question. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Obviously, I'm the youngest here. I think to borrow Tim's point, this is the bet they've made in this election, which is that if you can turn out traditionally non-engaged young male voters, you can make up the margins that Biden was able to gain, small margins in 2020, and you can win the election. And keep in mind, Biden really just won by 44,000 votes in 3 states. That was basically it. And if you can just turn that around, do it with the demographic where you have the most salience, and that's male voters. And so they're pretty overt about this. Theo Von, the UFC stuff, all that. It's an attempt to reach these audiences which do not, unfortunately for me, do not tune into MSNBC in the morning, right? Like they're not watching Morning Joe. They're getting the news from elsewhere, and they're going to those audiences where they are. And we've had at the Bulwark, for instance, we've had a lot of people write with concern that Harris is not recognizing the threat that this poses to her candidacy, that she should also be in those places, or at least dispatch people to those places. And I think that's valid because, the whole subtext of this is that there's a tremendous gender gap, and it's potentially going to cancel each other out. So then it becomes, well, which side can generate the most enthusiasm among the people who support them? And so I think that's what the Trump play is. That, and of course, to muddy the gender gap as much as possible. And so you've seen him talk about abortion in these incredibly opaque terms. Really took a while to come down on the Florida initiative, the amendment that would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution there. And now this whole thing about being a protector of women and not even having to worry about abortion. It's very evident.
Free IVF for everybody.
Free IVF, yeah.
Yeah.
Here and there, you just take your IVF. And so, yeah, for them, it's like try to sand down any distinction with Harris when it comes to that, and then gin up all the enthusiasm among the young white male electorate.
What did you think of the Tim Walz ad with fixing the truck and that whole appeal to the male vote?
I think the ad was directionally in the right place, right? Like they obviously chose him because they think he has that appeal. What's confusing to me is that it's one thing to create your own content and put it out there for the masses to consume, but like you do kind of need to go to where they are, right? Like you can't just assume that they're going to see that ad. And Tim Walz, who really was chosen as vice president because he was so fluent in these settings and very good on these interviews, has been bottled up for the past couple of weeks. Now he's going to the Ann Arbor, Michigan football game. I think it's against Minnesota on Saturday. He's going to be doing a lot of that stuff. And so maybe they're...
Football would be a natural for him, right?
He was a coach. He's a football coach. Yeah. The guy, but I truly did expect him to have more of a public-facing role. And it's possible he does after the debate on Tuesday. But if I were them, that's the thing, is I'd put him in those settings. He's the one who you chose for that reason. And you do need to go to where the voters are.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, you wanted to ask Tim something.
I'm sorry, Mona. Can I just I want to make one quick point about the age gap here, because it is interesting. I do think that Trump's outreach in the who knows if it's specifically the Manosphere podcasts that are helping him here, but his age gap is actually closer against Harris than it was against Biden. There's a CNN poll that came out I think yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
Harris is up by about 12 points amongst voters under the age of 35, but that gap was 21 points with Biden, and the age gap, or the gender gap, persists with women. It's 53-39 for women. With men, it's much closer. It's within a couple of points. So I think that Trump has done a good job of reaching out to that younger set of voters, whether or not it's, again, specifically these outreaches that are working, I don't know. But again, that age gap has narrowed even while the gender gap persists.
Yeah. Somebody has called this a polar coaster, this time of year. And there are so many polls saying so many different things, but I was looking at one that looked at young voters. I think this was the Harvard poll of young voters, and it found that among females, Harris led by 47 points, which is crazy. But among men, she led by 17 points, which is much less, but still significant. Okay, I turn it over to you, Bill Galston.
Tim, there was an article a couple of days ago in the New York Times that really arrested my attention. I think you know what I'm going to be saying. And that is, the article argued with some specificity that this generation of young men without college degrees, out of desperation, is turning to organized religion. And that in the 30 and under set, young men are now outnumbering young women in returning to regular worship services, etc., or perhaps they're going there for the first time. Intuitively, that would make a great deal of sense to me, given the desperation of young men without a lot of education in these hard times. But is that just an anecdote, or is there something to that?
Bill, I do think there's something to it. I guess the question I have, and maybe more candidly, the concern that I have is what sort of religious identification are we talking about here? In other words, are these young men, and of course we're dealing in sort of sweeping generalities here, which is always dangerous, but are the majorities of these young men who that Times piece is describing, are they entering into sort of serious, structured, orthodox religious traditions wherein the liturgies and the creeds and the confessions mean a great deal, and their sort of their identity truly is sort of being transformed in Christ, or is it something closer to a sort of civil religion or even a political religion where in the sort of sweep of our twin epidemics of loneliness and isolation, you have these young men finding sort of tribal communities that reflect some of their sort of core social and cultural values. And it happens to be sort of wrapped up in some of the trappings of religion, but it is not, in fact, built around a real, sincere faith conviction. That's something that I see, that I've reported on a bit, and that I know firsthand. Friends, guys who I grew up with, are sort of in the middle of that, and the findings themselves are really fascinating because, to your point, it defies sort of generations of trend lines that we've seen around how young men and young women relate to their sort of religious ecosystems. But I'm not yet willing to reach the conclusion that this somehow suggests a meaningful change in the trajectory of a secularizing culture, secularizing sort of generational schisms that we've seen. I don't know that what that Times piece is pointing to is evidence of a meaningful spiritual change as much as it is a meaningful change at the intersection of culture and politics.
Very interesting. All right. With that, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Factor. So cooler fall days are upon us, and you can warm yourself up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for fall, thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. I must say this company has come a long way toward practically producing homemade food right there for you in a pre-measured, pre-made package. It's amazing. They have 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week. So you always will have new flavors to explore. You can crush your wellness goals this month with dietitian-approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. From breakfast to dessert, stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Also, keep your kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein, avoid meat, or simply eat a well-balanced diet. So head to factormeals.com/begtodiffer50 and use code BEGTODIFFER50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. That's code BEGTODIFFER50 at factormeals.com/BEGTODIFFER50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. And we thank them for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, so let's talk a bit about whether this campaign is about real issues. Kamala Harris gave an interview to MSNBC on Wednesday evening. It was a fairly normal interview. She talked about manufacturing. She talked about the border. She talked about taxes and tariffs. It was fairly normal. But on the other hand, let's have a look at what Trump is doing and saying. So for one thing, as we alluded to a few minutes ago, he is talking about imposing a cap on the interest that credit card companies can charge. That's a 10% cap, which is, the last time I checked, a price control, which would mean that it would have the effect that price controls always do. It would limit supply. So, while it seems like it's doing something good for people who have debt, it actually is terrible because then they won't be able to get loans. He talked about that. He's already reversed himself on the SALT tax that was repealed as part of his 2017 tax reform. And now he's talking about, so the exclusion was repealed. Now he's talking about adding it back in an attempt to win over voters in high tax blue states. We mentioned the free IVF. I'm going to start with you, Tim. Is any of this recognizable as conservatism?
No, not in the traditional sense, I don't think. But Mona, then again, what has been recognizable as conservatism in recent years? I mean, truly, when I remember getting into this spat with some folks online, which is always a horrible way to begin an anecdote, of course, towards the end of Trump's presidency, because the conservatives were, and this was referring to Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley on the Senate side and Jim Jordan and Mike Johnson and some others on the House side. They were trying to come up with ways to keep Trump in office. And I just sort of sounded off and said, well, what is conservative about sabotaging the transition of power? I'm not entirely clear on this. And I think that if we if we drilled into the Republican policy platform from the convention, or if we looked at any of Trump's proposals over the course of the campaign, would you see certain elements of it that harken back to sort of Bush era, Reagan era conservatism? Sure, you would, here and there. But on the whole, would you say that what you see now is indicative of a conservative policy agenda for governing? Not necessarily, no. I think we've sort of reached the kitchen sink phase of the campaign, wherein
that's a good way of putting it.
Donald Trump is just going to sort of say whatever he needs to say to whomever he needs to say it on any given day, if he believes that it can help him scrape together the coalition that he needs. To Sam's point earlier, I mean, it's so easy to forget that despite losing the popular vote by 7 million, he loses really the Electoral College by, I think the total was 42,910. I'd have to go back and double check that, but I believe that's the total across the 3 states that he lost. So this is such trench warfare at this stage, and there's really no downside to, from Trump's political vantage point in floating these things, eliminating taxes on waiters' tips, or capping any of these sort of populist idea, free IVF. Like, is there any real electoral downside? Are there people who are going to come out and vote against him because of one of these proposals? Not really. And so I think at this stage, they're willing to just sort of throw anything at the wall and see what sticks.
Not only is there no downside electorally, but there is no voice. The Wall Street Journal editorial page and National Review and the New York Post no longer chastise a Republican who comes out for things like this. They don't say, no, we're not for that. This is a bad idea. They simply say, oh, well, the Democrats are, the ones who we really have to worry about. But Sam, there are two things, though, I guess you can say. I love Tim's expression about the kitchen sink phase of the campaign. Absolutely right. However, there are two themes that Trump has hit consistently, and I think he really does believe in, to the degree that matters. And those two things are tariffs and, deportations or the border. And the scale of tariffs that we are talking about now in this campaign are beyond anything that he attempted the first time around, and would be devastating to the economy, and particularly to the one issue that most voters say is most important and is most concerning to them, and namely inflation. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. Those are the two consistent issues from Trump, tariffs, immigration. I thought there was actually a very telling thing that happened over the past week, to Tim's point, and your point, Mona. Mitch McConnell actually spoke out. He never talks about Trump anymore, but he did speak out.
He did?
About
I missed
tariffs. That. Yeah, well, that's what's telling about it. Is that in a normal universe, I think having the Senate leader of your own party come out against the presidential candidate's primary economic policy would be considered pretty remarkable. I can't imagine a universe in which Chuck Schumer publicly went and said, you know what, Kamala Harris's idea on childcare really misses the mark. I mean, we would treat that as insane. But Mitch McConnell did that, and it kind of got lost in the shuffle because so much else is going on. And I think to a degree that does underscore the way that Trump has kind of co-opted the party intellectually and politically. Tariffs are, by and large, bad for inflation unless they're strategically targeted. All the critical economic thinkers believe this, including on the Republican side of the aisle, and yet here we are. On immigration, something similar has kind of happened, although less so. Trump has a winning hand, obviously, when it comes to this. Every poll suggests that his people know it and Harris's people know it. We pulled some ad impact data on this. The ad spending on immigration is disproportionately on the Republican side of the aisle, something like 5-1. But Trump and J.D. Vance have fumbled the ball a little bit by making this about migrants eating pets, which is demonstrably false, and has turned a story about what migration into the Rust Belt communities can do to that community. It's turned into a story about whether or not these people are spreading racist lies and whether they can be entrusted with the truth. And you have seen, to a small degree, some Republicans speak out about that. I mean, it's not anything overwhelming. The Wall Street Journal page did talk about it. Some Republicans here and there have said this is inappropriate. Mike DeWine wrote a column about it.
Yep.
But again, that's not stopping them, Trump and J.D. Vance. And so I think in those two cases, they are the most consistent issues that Trump has. They're the things that you can expect him to act on if he were to get president with some certainty. It remains to be the two places where there is some Republican opposition, but by and large, that Republican opposition is pretty feeble.
Sonny, there's a non-racist way of believing in lower immigration and believing in tariffs. But in the hands of Trump, it is very much first of all, on immigration, it's not, we have our communities are having trouble absorbing so many new immigrants. We need a break, to sort of assimilate people and so on. No, it's the dark hordes of criminals and insane asylum denizens, et cetera, are coming to get you. There are openly, viciously racist memes that circulate about, your neighborhood under Kamala Harris, and it shows this big, very ugly looking group of people who look dangerous and dark skinned and all of that. And your neighborhood under Trump, white picket fence, American flag flying. I mean, just disgusting stuff. And, the same with trade. It is like this autarky, we have to be pure and by ourselves and not have those, the invasion of foreign goods that are destroying the purity of our blood. And so, I guess what I'm asking you is, how big an audience do you think there is for that kind of ugly nativist thing? Or is it that people who have more reasonable views sort of say, well, he overstates it a little, but in general, I'm in agreement. Can you sort of parse that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing to remember is that the theory of immigration in the Trump administration and the Trump campaign is that immigration is bad. Not illegal immigration, but immigration in general. This is Stephen Miller's whole thing, right?
Yep.
We haven't talked very much about Stephen Miller this time around, this election. I feel like he's been very much in the background, but his whole theory of immigration is that it's bad. He wants fewer legal immigrants. Fewer illegal immigrants, certainly, but also fewer legal immigrants. He wants to bring over fewer Indian programmers and Chinese doctors, whatever. He just wants fewer immigrants, period. That is the basis of their thinking. And I do think that you can look, the unifying idea behind all of Trump's populist economic things that we were discussing just now, tariffs, the SALT limitation, the taxes on tips, right? Immigration. These are all things that, what was the term that Sam used that I loved? Critical economic thinkers. Critical economic thinkers on the right think like, okay, these are things that we need to understand and we do them right and it's good for the economy. And what Trump says is, screw these eggheads. They're doing things that are bad for you. I'm going to do things that are good for you. I'm going to lower your taxes. You're not going to pay taxes on tips. That's ridiculous. Why would you pay taxes on tips? Think of all the money you'll save. Or you pay too much taxes on your house. You live in Dallas, Sonny. You pay too much taxes on your house. Well, you can take that off your income taxes for the federal government. That's great. And this sticks it to not just the other party or Democrats, because it doesn't really stick it to the Democrats. This is like he's arguing a lot of Democratic policy proposals here. Well, who it sticks it to is George F. Will, right? He's sticking it to the people at NR who are and folks at NR are still saying, no, the SALT limitation is good. That's like one of the good things you did, Donald Trump, or the Wall Street Journal, whatever. Like that's who he is positioning himself against. And this has always been his great strength is in telling people the Republican Party, I'm not actually part of the Republican Party. I'm sticking it to the George W. Bushes and the Mitt Romneys who want to make you poorer and don't like you and just want to help their buddies on the coast. Like he has managed to square that circle in a way that's vaguely infuriating, but has been clearly effective.
Yeah. And everybody in the Republican Party, with very few exceptions, has concluded that the populist running against the old Republican Party that's it. That's the new party,
well,
and that's what we have to sign up. That is the party, and that's what we have to sign up for, and that's what they salute smartly. So Bill Galston, I want to ask you, do you have the sense, and I know you're going to be reluctant to answer this because you'll think I want you to put it into, get into Trump's mind. I'm not asking you to get into Trump's mind, but last week we talked about your belief that the election is actually going pretty well for Harris. So do you feel that Trump is spiraling with, hiring Corey Lewandowski back and taking advice from Laura Loomer and all of the things we've been discussing and typing out in all caps, I hate Taylor Swift, and having picked J.D. Vance? I mean, it's a long list. Do you feel that the wheels have come off a bit, or is that saying too much?
Well, if I made a list of the last places on earth I'd like to be in, Trump's mind is on top of that list.
Yeah, agreed.
So please don't ask me to go there. Well, what I've concluded is that there is now a two-track Trump campaign. On track one is Trump. And Trump's campaign managers have given up on what turned out to be futile efforts to rein him in, to keep him, quote unquote, on message. They're going to let Trump be Trump because they have no choice. Doesn't matter what they do or what they say. He will do whatever strikes him as the right thing to do or say at that moment, period, full stop. Track two of the Trump campaign is a very disciplined air war and ground game. And I've been talking to people in various swing states, friends and political scientists who live in different swing states, and they're pretty much unanimous on this point, that if you look at the Trump campaign other than Trump, and what you see is, a very focused and effective effort to drive home a handful of basic messages and to go to the places where people who are most likely to be responsive to those messages live and work. So, I think there are two cars in the Trump caravan, and the wheels have sort of come off the first car, but the second one is functioning just fine. And so there's a kind of modus vivendi, I believe, between the Trump campaign on the one hand and its candidate on the other. That's point number one. Point number two. I think we're oversimplifying Trump's relationship to the traditional Republican Party. And this has been my theory of the case since 2016. In 2016, he went to the traditional building blocks of the Republican Party and asked them basically, what do you care about the most? And for the ones who cared most about judges, he promised them judges. For the ones who cared most about deregulation and getting government off my back, went to them and said, check. The ones who cared most about the marginal tax rates, whether they were very wealthy individuals or corporations, what do you want most? Check. And he hasn't really wavered on those commitments. And if you look at what he's saying this year, he's promising to double down on even lower rates for high net worth individuals and corporations. He's promising to redouble his anti-regulatory efforts. These are very traditional business Republican appeals. And I suspect they are succeeding in maintaining the allegiance of the members of those communities that care about that most, etc. Alongside that, he has packaged various populist appeals, some of which we have been talking about. And he is the first Republican leader to take fully to heart Dick Cheney's famous remarks that Ronald Reagan has taught us that budget deficits don't matter. Once they don't matter, you can have a bidding war. And by the way, the bidding war is not confined to one side. It was, after all, Kamala Harris who decided in the wake of the no taxes on tips, that she'd better see him and raise him one if she wanted to stay at the table. So I think it's a more complex picture than this conversation is suggesting.
I'll just, if I could add on that, I think there's been also a pattern where Trump will craft a policy position wholly out of the air after meeting people who want that policy position. I mean, just recently he came out in favor of flavored vaping, which he had banned while president, or worked to ban while president, and that came after he met with a vaping lobbyist. I mean,
same thing with TikTok. He switched his position on TikTok in response to one big donor.
Yeah, same thing with the visas for that Silicon Valley depends on after he did the podcast with those guys out there. So some of this is, to Bill's point, and to Tim's point, frankly, it's just sort of like giving people exactly what they want to hear so that you can get them to support you. And I think, credit to him. Like, he's shrewdly calculated that he can be a chameleon in terms of policies, and people will gravitate towards him, and that there's very little punishment to doing these types of things because if there's no vote for intellectual consistencies out there.
Yeah. There's a very fine line that separates populism from pandering. And I think
wait, you mean there's a line?
Yeah, there's a line.
Okay, Sonny.
I want to emphasize. I want to totally agree with Bill's point about targeting groups and figuring out what they wanted and giving them, and adding that, look, illegal immigration is a thing that the mainstream GOP has always kind of underappreciated as a driving factor for Republican voters. I remember, I may be misremembering my history, but when George W. Bush was president, it wasn't the Iraq War that derailed him with the party in his second term. It was the push for amnesty and immigration reform. Right, immigration reform was the thing that kind of hurt him with the base of the GOP. And I think that is, look, again, say whatever you want about Trump and say whatever you want about the economics of immigration. Well, the thing that he really does understand about the voters he turns out is that they hate illegal immigration. They hate it and they want to stop it. And whether or not his policies actually do that, whether or not the wall works, it doesn't matter. He's saying the right things.
Well, that is a perfect segue, because now I would like to move to our third topic, which is that Kamala Harris has announced that she's going to be journeying to the border on Friday of this week. So the views of the American public have moved sharply in an anti-immigration direction over the last number of years, especially during the Biden years. 55% of Americans, according to Gallup, think immigration should be decreased. And here is a kind of disturbing statistic. 50% of Americans, including 42% of Democrats, say they'd support mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. So she is clearly responding to that concern in the electorate. But Tim, Alberta, there are risks for her in elevating the issue, right? I mean, she is at a severe disadvantage here. Should she be driving straight into the deep water here where she's already got a problem? Does that just make it make her vulnerability more obvious, or can she do herself some good here?
Well, look, Mona, she's got two problems, right? One of them, and I'm almost tempted to be a little bit cheeky here and say that the answer to all of our questions in this entire conversation is those 100,000 soccer moms in those 12 suburban counties that I mentioned earlier, right? Like everything, so much of what we're talking about here just comes back to this idea that you have this incredibly narrow, finite universe of persuadable voters who still exist in this election, and both campaigns have zeroed in on them and are spending tens of millions of dollars to try to win this game of tug of war. But
they
the
know
other
their
problem,
pets' names. They know where they shop.
They really do. It's an obsession, right? And understandably so. I think the other issue for Harris, obviously, is that this Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of 20 years ago. It's interesting hearing Sonny's point about the McCain-Kennedy immigration push during Bush's second term. We forget now, but one of the great intra-party conflicts of like the past 50 years was Charlie Rangel and the Congressional Black Caucus against Luis Gutierrez and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus on the issue of immigration, not just illegal, but legal immigration. And this question of, long before Trump was raked over the coals for talking about black jobs, the Congressional Black Caucus was basically saying that same thing, that you're letting all these people into our country and they're taking our jobs. I mean, remember Obama's own candidacy in 2008, he had to really thread this needle very delicately, trying to appeal to Latino working class voters while also appealing to his black base, and that was very, very difficult for him to do. He didn't always succeed in doing it. So Harris obviously has to. She's got to execute this very difficult two-step of trying to sort of play up her prosecutorial background, her criminal justice expertise, this idea that I too can protect the vulnerable soccer moms of America, right? Or at least the vulnerable soccer moms of suburban Detroit and Milwaukee and Philly. While simultaneously not sort of feeding into any of the fear-mongering that when you look at the polling, even the polling you cited earlier from Harvard, Mona, it's like, on the one hand, Democrats can look at that and say, well, this is great. We've got these huge lopsided margins. But when you look at the underlying numbers around intensity and enthusiasm, that continues to be a serious red flag. And when I've talked with Democrats here in Michigan, where I live, and elsewhere, they are very, very concerned because of Gaza primarily, but some other issues as well, that you're just not going to see the raw turnout numbers that Biden saw in 20 among those young voters. And so Harris here, in getting to the border and talking immigration, she's got to be very careful in sort of walking this line. I understand why she's doing it, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea tactically, strategically. I just think that it's fraught.
Yeah, it sure is, Sam. I mean, one of the things is I'm not sure how she can finesse the matter that the Biden administration really was, AWOL on this issue for 3.5 years. And, she may not have been the border czar, but she was the vice president. And that's tricky. What do you think?
Well, I second everything Tim said. You should go back and look at like the Clinton era discourse on immigration. It's almost like shocking to Democrats to recall that the party actually was in a different place intellectually back then. The way I think about this is, imagine how bad it would be for Harris if Trump had not torpedoed that bipartisan bill. She would have nothing to talk about. I'm not saying this is a good situation for her, but if not for that, it would have been so much worse.
That's true.
And so she'll go down to, I imagine she'll go down to the border. She'll say, look, we tried to pass this historic amount of funding for border security, would have constructed portions of the wall. We would have, the border agents union embraced this bill. It would have given them tons of money. But Trump said no. And she does have that. But that's it. I think that's basically all she has. It's interesting that she's going down there at all. To me, that kind of signals that she knows it's still a problem, because you would rather talk about virtually anything else than the border at this point. But it allows her probably to say, I visited this community. I recognize these issues. Maybe she gets a good photo op out of it. But this is really bad terrain for her. It's really bad terrain for her. And if not for Trump screwing up the issue of Springfield by, maybe he didn't screw it up, but he sullied it by being, racist about Haitians there. And then if not for him nixing this border bill that the Senate Republicans and Democrats had crafted, she would be really in a bad spot here.
Yeah, Bill, what's your sense of it? Good idea or bad idea to travel down there and elevate the issue?
Depends on what she does when she's there. Mm-hmm. But it could be a good idea. But she has to grasp the nettle firmly. She has 3 things she can say, not just one. First of all, obviously, she can refer to her past as a tough prosecutor who went after the narco gangs and the human traffickers, etc. And I think that reinforces a piece of her that people like. Number 2, she can make the point that Sam just put on the table, and that is that there was an opportunity to move forward together, Democrats and Republicans, on this issue, and not only were congressional Democrats willing to pick up that offer, but the Republicans were too, and it was only one man who torpedoed it, Donald Trump. I think she can say with a straight face, he didn't want a cure, he wanted an issue. And that's what we have. The third thing she can say, and it happens to be true, is that the rate of illegal border crossings is now lower than it was when Donald Trump left office. What we're forgetting is that when Joe Biden finally did what he could have done all along, and rein in the asylum process, the rate of illegal encounters has plunged. Just look at the chart for the past 8 months. It's like that. So, now that that talking point invites the retort, which is obvious. Well, then why didn't he do it at the beginning? And there's no answer for that. Right. But I think it's better to say that he did it than to pretend that he didn't. And so I do think there are two kinds of issues in campaigns. There are offensive issues and defensive issues. When you're dealing with a defensive issue, the point is not to win on the issue, it's to narrow the loss. And I think if she plays her cards right at the border, she has an opportunity to do that.
Sonny, please indulge me, because I know that this issue is very clear as a matter of politics, that right now in America, you can't be pro-immigration and hope to win on it. But I just want to say a few things about immigration in general. First of all, we desperately need immigrants. Desperately need them. We have a severe labor shortage, and not just for things like dishwashers and people to pick our crops and all that. We need doctors, we need nurses, we need engineers, we need all kinds of people in our economy. And those Haitians in Springfield, they're not illegal. They're here legally, and they are revitalizing that town. It's just so painful to see the kind of xenophobia that has been whipped up against immigrants, and the foolishness and short-sightedness of saying, we need to close our borders. It's one thing to say, yes, you don't want chaos at the border. You certainly don't want people to be able to come in without vetting, but to say that you want to radically diminish the number of people who come here and to imagine that they're bringing crime and drugs and all of that, those are lies. They commit fewer crimes than native-born people. They want to keep their noses clean for the most part. Obviously, there are cases with so many people, but in general, immigration is good for us. All right. Thank you for allowing me to rant. Do you have anything to say about it?
Yes, I'm pro. I mean, look, I have always looked at immigration as an American national security, but also an American advantage sort of thing. Yes. The brain drain is good. We want to steal all of their smart people and bring them over here. Steal the best parts of the world. Bring them to America. That's what we do. And it's like reverse colonialism. Come here. And it's amazing. I love it. So I'm pro legal immigration. Look, illegal immigration has always been a thorny issue. It's always been a very tricky thing, because it just right there in the name, illegal immigration. People don't you're coming to the country illegally. That's bad. Nobody wants that. Right. And I totally understand that. And this is why Harris is going down there. This is why she has to go down there. Here are some numbers that are from this is a poll done by Unidos US, the largest Latino advocacy group. It was early August, 3,000 Latinos surveyed. 59% said they would vote for Harris, compared to 32% for Trump. So that's a pretty big advantage, 27 points, but smaller, I think, than you might expect. The trick here is in English-dominant Latino households, Harris's lead significantly tightens, right? So it's just over half, 51% of the English-speaking households support Harris, while Trump support in such households is 38%. So that gap is 13%, compared to Spanish-dominant households, where it's 64% of Latino voters back Harris, and Trump only gets 30%. So she needs to shore up her share of the vote with Hispanic families who have been in the country for a long time. I think this is, again, it's one of these things that is underappreciated, is the distaste for illegal immigration in Hispanic communities. I think that is something that, again, Trump has really focused on and kind of hit on as a distinct thing he can do to say, look, I'm better than the rest of these folks who want to, they want to give all the illegal immigrants amnesty. They want to let them all in the country. You followed the rules. You came over here properly. Your family, your grandparents did, et cetera, et cetera. They want, and I understand why that's effective. So she needs to go down there and say. And remember, her first campaign ad, right, was at the wall. It was like, we built more of the wall, right? Was it? Have I made this up in my head? But she did a pro border security ad as one of her first campaign ads. I think they understand it's a real problem, and they are smartly trying to fix it.
Okay.
Mona,
yeah,
can I just add one quick point?
Yeah.
It really is remarkable to note how much movement there has been on this issue in the past decade, or even less. Back in 2016, when Trump was running in the primaries, we were seeing in state after state, in the exit polling, even among people who voted for Trump, there were never majorities when asked, would you support mass deportation of people here illegally? It was really remarkable, and I remember writing about this at the time. I think actually there was only one state where the exit polls showed, and it was like 51%. It was a very small majority. I think it might have been Alabama or Mississippi, one of those two states. But everywhere else, even among this self-selecting group of conservative Republican primary voters who were voting Trump in 2016, they were saying time after time, a majority of them, that they disapproved of the idea of mass deportation. And if you look at where we are now, with not just where the Republican Party has moved, but to your point earlier, Mona, we're seeing polling pretty consistently that's showing among independents and moderates, also among Democrats, anywhere from a quarter to a third. Some polls show even higher than a third of Democrats saying that they'd be okay with mass deportation. So even as the country has, over the past decade, moved pretty significantly, substantially to the left on abortion, on a handful of other cultural issues, it has really moved markedly right on the immigration issue. And I think that probably has a lot to do with Trump, but I also think it has a lot to do with what you said earlier, which is that the Biden administration was sort of willfully incompetent in securing the border. And that's something that people take note of. To Sonny's point, I've done a ton of reporting over the past few years in Arizona and in Texas, a little bit in Nevada also, among Latino voters there, among Democratic Latino voters, and they are up in arms about this. So, it's one thing to just sort of factor Trump's nativist, xenophobic rhetoric into the equation. Of course, that plays a role. But I actually think if you even consider in the 2020 Democratic primary, that moment on stage when the moderators asked, how many of you would offer health insurance coverage to illegal immigrants? And everyone on the stage put their hand up. I mean, including Joe Biden, who was vice president to the guy who, when he said that, when he was president, Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie," right? Like that, we have seen a sea change in Democratic politics on the immigration issue. And I think Biden took office and the people around him began the administration just believing that the American public was over Donald Trump's sort of harsh anti-immigrant rhetoric, and they completely misread the situation.
Yep. We have to move on now to our highlights and lowlights of the week. Bill, you can go first.
Yeah. We can resolve this with a fact check next week, but I have a distinct memory that Joe Biden was the only person on stage who did not raise his hand in response to that question. To be continued.
Well, we'll check. We'll check.
Okay. Here is my highlight, and it's something very interesting, important, and true that Kamala Harris said in her speech to the Economic Club of Pittsburgh yesterday, namely that it takes too damn long to build things in this country. And she even got the reason correct, namely that we have a permitting process that is totally broken. The question will be whether she'll be willing to take the next step, because what is most broken about the permitting process is NEPA and environmental impact statements and the multiple choke points that creates in the system. If she's serious about building things in this country, will she be willing to take on entrenched environmental lobbies that believe that NEPA gives them the best chance not only to delay projects, but actually to destroy the ones they don't like.
This does not compute. This sounds way too much like serious policy making and solving problems, and we don't do that in America anymore. So I don't know. Okay, Tim, Alberta.
I would say that low light of the week is sort of getting the final nail in the coffin on another presidential debate, another Trump-Harris debate, as both campaigns sort of made clear this week that that's not going to happen. And I just think it's bad for the country. I think it's bad for the process. It's bad for our institutions. We should have these folks debating at least twice and preferably more. My highlight of the week, I'm going to be very parochial here, but if you are not a baseball fan, you have to pay attention to what the Detroit Tigers are doing right now. It hasn't been seen in 50 or 60 years. It's like something out of a Disney movie, a team that was completely left for dead 6 weeks ago and was really not a good team at all, has suddenly called up all of these kids from the minor leagues who have no pedigree. Many of them will really have no future in Major League Baseball, and they're all playing out of their mind. It's like, it's just one of these weird voodoo things that happens in baseball every once in a blue moon. They're about to secure a playoff berth when they had a 1% chance of doing so a month ago, according to all of the statistical websites. So it's really just an amazing thing happening in my backyard here.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Sam Stein.
Well, I actually went while these two were talking and looked up the debate clip from 2020, and Tim is right. Joe Biden did raise his hand when asked if he would provide healthcare to undocumented immigrants. Sorry, Bill. Didn't mean to fact check you in real time. Highlight of the week. I would go with baseball too, but I'm going to go with Shohei Ohtani. Never seen anything like this in my life.
All right.
I don't think we ever will. I was talking with JVL about this. Is this the most spectacular season in all of sports, not just baseball? And JVL thinks it is. This man has done something miraculous, and he's only doing half of what he can do because he's not pitching this year. So truly a one-of-a-kind generational athlete. Low light of this week, I think it happened this morning. The mayor of our biggest city has been indicted. I think that's a shame. Not totally unexpected, but anytime the mayor of New York City gets indicted, I feel like that qualifies as a low light. So I will go with Eric Adams' indictment as low light.
All right. Thank you. Sonny.
Very quickly, highlight and low light, same thing. New movie from Francis Ford Coppola, Megalopolis. It's great. We've got a $120 million Francis Ford Coppola movie. That's bonkers, insane bonkers movie. It's both amazing and terrible. It's amazingly terrible, terribly amazing. Take your pick. But go see it. Nobody's going to go see it. You should go see it.
Okay, thank you for that. My highlight is actually related to Sam's because, yes, we did see the indictment of the mayor of New York this week. But, there has been this fiction that Trump has put out that the Justice Department has been weaponized against Republicans. And so it is important to remember that this Justice Department, under Democrats, a Democratic administration, has now indicted the Democratic mayor of New York, the Democratic sitting senator from New Jersey, Bob Menendez, a Democratic member of Congress from Texas, Henry Cuellar, and the Democratic son of the President of the United States, or at least they have continued the indicting of that person. So, the ideal of the Justice Department is that it will be apolitical. And I think this Justice Department has demonstrated that it takes that seriously. And this is a very, very important norm and value to uphold. And we should remember that when the next time somebody says, they're weaponizing the Justice Department against Republicans. And therefore, when we get into power, we'll be justified in turning our guns against our political foes. That would not be turnabout. That would be unprecedented. So, with that, I want to thank our guests, Tim Alberta, and our two sit-ins, Sam Stein and Sonny Bunch, and of course my regular Bill Galston, and our readers and viewers and listeners, and our producer, Jim Swift. And Beg to Differ will return next week, as every week in this crazy election season.